Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Neil Ullman. I'm an energy resource professional with the Energy Bureau at the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Today, we're announcing our latest funding opportunity using the portion of our Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement funding dollars that we've done similarly the last few years. But we're going to have a slightly different application process. So I want to walk through the eligibility requirements before we get into the application requirements in a few minutes. First, we're going to go through logistics with Patty.
Hi, my name is Maddie McGuffers, and I'll be hanging out mostly in the background, helping out with the logistics of the Zoom. So first of all, welcome and thanks for being here. One thing to note is we are recording this meeting. We'll be posting it on the website later, so it will be available to review at a later time. This is a webinar, so you're all automatically muted. If you do have a question, the easiest way to ask that is to type it in the chat. I believe it will just go to me and Neil. There's also a Q&A feature, and I'll do my best to keep an eye on that. And if there's a timely question, we'll do that while the webinar is happening, but most of the questions will be kept until the end. If you are called on to speak, it's really helpful if you identify yourself by stating your name and who you're affiliated with. And if you happen to be joining on the phone, pressing *6 to mute or unmute yourself, and *9 will raise your hand. And if you have any other questions, feel free to use that chat feature or the Q&A.
Thanks, Maddie. So just a quick overview of what the Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement was. Several years ago, the federal government, Volkswagen of North America, came into a settlement agreement for the cheater devices that Volkswagen had been installing on some of its diesel-powered vehicles. Different states, entities, et cetera, were designated as beneficiaries of that settlement. For Montana, we were awarded $12.6 million approximately, based off of a formula of population, amount of Volkswagens in the state of Montana at the time, and some other things. The settlement was primarily focused on replacing medium and heavy duty diesel powered vehicles with new, cleaner versions or repowers. Also, starting off with a new source of funding for electric duty vehicle charging equipment. The goals of the program was to reduce NOx emissions, nitrogen oxide emissions, which cause respiratory illnesses, especially in the elderly and children, and which these cheater devices had been falsely reporting on, and was the main source of the settlement. Another goal of the settlement was to invest in alternative fuels and infrastructure, and to create air quality benefits for as many Montanans as possible. Again, for Montana, what we did in our beneficiary mitigation plan that we took public comment on about 8 years ago was asking what we wanted to have our portion of the settlement funding focus on. And you can see here that we wanted to maximize the most amount of money that we could for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. The most that we can spend is 15%. And then Montanans told DEQ that they wanted to spend as much as possible on vehicle replacement or repowers. There is a pipe there for administrative costs. It's actually probably going to be a lot smaller than that in the end, just because we've been trying to make as many of these dollars go towards actual project activities as possible. So for this clean truck, bus, and airport equipment program, this is kind of the third round that we've done it, although we've done it a little bit differently each time, but generally the eligibility requirements have stayed the same. Again, just like the overall settlement, the goal is to reduce mobile sources of NOx emissions, improve air quality for Montanans, and support investments in zero emission transportation. We're doing that with funding of up to $500,000 per project, with maximum levels set out for cost share percentages depending on the specific project, which I'll get into now. So we've separated the funding into four different category types. For categories A and B, which focuses on replacement of on-road trucks and buses. So the truck or bus that you're replacing, and this is for transit or shuttle buses. We'll get to school buses in a moment. For the truck or bus that you're replacing, the GVWR of the vehicle needs to be 14,001 pounds or greater. And it needs to be diesel powered. And things that it can be used for, or that it can be doing right now, is things like local freight delivery, waste haulers, dump trucks, street sweepers, courier services, delivery trucks, etc. And it needs to have an engine model year of between 1992 and 2009. That's going to be an important distinction to remember in a moment. The engine model year requirement is a part of the Volkswagen settlement, so that's not something that DEQ can change at all. So it's only vehicles with engine model years between that period of time. The settlement, the way it was structured, was really geared towards government-owned fleets. And so the cost share percentage that we can offer for government-owned fleets, and that can be state, university, city, county, school districts, transit district, all those different types of government, tribal, of course, can be defined as government owned. For private or for-profit businesses, non-government fleets, this settlement had lower cost share requirements, but we're trying to maximize that as much as possible. So for these first two categories, A and B, for truck and bus replacements, if you're doing a new alternative fuel, and alternative fuel means something like compressed natural gas, CNG, propane, and things like that, then you can, for a government-owned fleet, this funding can pay for up to 20 or 60% of the cost of your new alternative fuel vehicle. For a non-government fleet, it's 25%. If you're replacing your older vehicle with a new cleaner diesel vehicle, then we can do up to 20%. And that's the same for a non-government fleet as well. If you're doing an all-electric vehicle, we can also pay for the cost of the associated charging equipment for that. Now, this wouldn't be charging equipment that any EV driver could use. It would just be the charger that's affiliated with that new electric truck or bus that you're purchasing here. We cannot, through the requirements of the settlement, purchase alternative fueling infrastructure. So we can't buy you a propane tank or a compressed natural gas distributor. That's, again, something that we cannot change from the requirements of the settlement. So for a new all electric, for this category, we can do up to 85% of the cost of the new truck or bus, and for non-government, up to 75%. Category C is where we capture school buses. And I mentioned earlier the difference in engine model year. So for school buses, the engine model year simply needs to be 2009 or older. So there is no cap on 1992. Not that there's a whole lot of those running around anymore. But for school buses, it needs to be a 2009 or older engine model year, class 4 through 8. So that's generally your class C or D school bus. And for those of you that live in the school bus world, you know what that means probably. We're doing only upgrades from diesel to a new all-electric school bus. A previous version of this funding opportunity 4 years ago helped deploy the first electric school buses in Montana. I'll get into more background in that in a moment, but we've seen success with those so far. And again, with the purchase of a new all-electric school bus, we can help purchase the associated charging equipment. For school districts that contract out their school bus services to private companies, I know that here in Helena, Bozeman and Billings, they all use a company called First Student. We actually funded First Student for 8 of their electric school buses down in Billings. If you're a contractor that's providing those services to a school district, you would be eligible for the 85%. Now, if you're looking to get into a yellow school bus for some reason, you're not providing services to a public school district, then you would be eligible for the 75%. I don't really have a good example of what that would look like. I haven't received any inquiries about it. So just assuming for the moment that you're operating a yellow school bus for a public school district, you're eligible for the full 85%. And then for the fourth category, which is airport ground support equipment, This is the only exception in the Volkswagen settlement where we can replace an older piece of equipment that's not just diesel powered. There's an exception here for older gasoline powered equipment. This is for equipment that services airplanes between flights. And so while I know that airports often operate their own transit buses or shuttle buses or fire equipment, this is not for that. Now, those things can be eligible under categories A and B, just like any transit agency or any entity that operates, like a fire department, I suppose. But for the airport equipment here, we're talking about belt loaders, baggage, belt loaders, pushback tractors, baggage tractors that haul around the little carts. They move our baggage from one plane to another. That's what we're talking about, is actually servicing. It's at the aircraft in between flights. So for this, we can, and then also specific to the settlement, it can only fund new electric powered airport ground support equipment. So for government owned, we can fund up to 70% of the cost. For non-government owned, we can do 50% of the cost. And the advantage here that I've learned over the last few years is that new electric ground support equipment, I think, is pretty cost relative to ICE, to diesel or gasoline airport ground support equipment. So this is also a pretty good deal here to get into new pieces of equipment for the airports. Going back to school buses, after we helped fund those first electric school buses in Montana with a portion of our Volkswagen funding, and then after a couple of other districts got some funding from the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level, we decided to help school districts understand the new things they would have to consider for electric school buses and operations and maintenance as they were getting ready to deploy them. So we did an electric school bus technical assistance program where we help these 6 school districts, track data, troubleshoot problems that they might have had with the chargers, or understanding the telemetrics of their bus, how much electricity they're using for fuel, how that compared to how much diesel they weren't using in the school buses they otherwise would have been operating. And it ended up being a good resource for them. And so there's a link here. All this information, these slide decks, will be available on our website. But this technical assistance project that Maddie just dropped into the chat is on our website now. So it might help you understand where or how these school buses actually can and are operating in Montana. One thing also, is you're thinking about taking the leap, is some other school districts and municipalities have already done for either alternative fuel or all electric vehicles. It can be a bit of a change as you're planning day-to-day operations with whatever type of fleet that you have. Not only can you get this financial support that will help mitigate the cost of going up to a new alternative fuel or advanced technology vehicle, but also looking down in the long run, there may be cost savings associated with that. The first example I'm providing here is with school buses. School bus costs have fluctuated, I think, quite a bit the last few years for a variety of reasons, the pandemic, global supply chain issues and whatnot. But ballpark a new diesel powered school bus at being about $125,000, according to Argonne National Laboratories, a fleet tool that I use pretty often. A brand new, straight off the assembly line diesel school bus will get about 7 miles per gallon, and we'll have about just under 30 tons of annual greenhouse gas emissions and 43 pounds annually of those NOx emissions that I was talking about that cause respiratory illnesses. Comparing that to gasoline and diesel, the gas and propane buses actually get a lower fuel efficiency, but they actually do have higher greenhouse gas emissions, but they do have significantly lower NOx emissions, which is the whole purpose of this Volkswagen settlement. And then and they are a little bit more expensive sometimes, especially the propane ones, maybe by a couple $1,000s. But generally they're about the same cost. Now, when you jump to a battery electric all-electric school bus, it is significantly more expensive up front for the cost of the bus and then throw in the charging equipment. But whether you're talking about an electric school bus or a Tesla or any passenger electric vehicle, they are extremely efficient. Most electric vehicles are around 80 to 85% or more efficient with the fuel that they use compared to internal combustion engines. And so you're going to see significantly lower fuel cost savings per mile. You're going to see a lot higher fuel efficiency. Compared to the diesel, which is 7. An electric school bus will get about 22.5 miles per gallon equivalent. Obviously, there is no gallons of electricity, so you have to do a calculation to get the equivalent of it. You're going to see significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions and zero NOx tailpipe emissions. So there's a significant advantage here when you're looking at the purpose of the Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement of reducing NOx emissions and moving into basically zero emissions for those new electric school buses. Another comparison I'll show is garbage trucks. As far as we don't have any electric garbage trucks in the state of Montana. We do have some compressed natural gas trucks, though down in Billings, operated by the city of Billings. Again, using the Argonne National Laboratories A-Fleet tool, you look at a diesel garbage truck, which has about which costs about $370,000, gets about $2.14 per mile fuel cost. The fuel economy is, it's a big truck, so the fuel economy is pretty terrible, when you compare it to any light duty pickup or passenger vehicle, but that's what it is for a diesel. Again, it's better than a compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas powered garbage truck. But then you do start seeing with alternative fuels a lower amount annual emissions of greenhouse gas emissions and significant drops in NOx emissions. And same thing when you go to a battery electric. Again, huge upfront cost. I'm not going to deny that, but that's what this funding is here for. But also significantly lower fuel cost savings. You get significantly higher fuel economy, and then also really big savings on the greenhouse gas and NOx emissions. Now, when you're talking about both electric school buses or electric garbage trucks or transit buses for that matter as well, again, another thing that all electric vehicles share, whether you're talking about the passenger vehicles or these bigger, larger, medium and heavy duty ones, they have something called regenerative braking. And it is something that happens when you come up to a stoplight or a stop sign, you're slowing for traffic or whatever. Your vehicle is actually capturing the heat from the brakes and turning it back into electricity so that you're actually almost literally refueling your vehicle as you're slowing down. And so the constant start stop of a garbage truck or a school bus as it gets to each stop, as it's picking up kids, as it's picking up the next bucket of garbage, is actually a really good use model for these types of things because you're using so much start, stop, and braking that you're actually refueling a little bit while you're driving. So that's a big advantage of these types of vehicles. As we're evaluating these, the main scoring criteria that we're using is obviously the NOx emissions reductions, but also generally speaking, how to achieve long-term air quality benefits for the greatest number of Montanans, which was another big thing that we looked at as we were putting together how we were going to implement the settlement in Montana. And then also how it would invest in clean alternative fuels and infrastructure in Montana. So if you are going to zero emission, zero tailpipe emission electric vehicle or even an alternative fuel vehicle, you'll get more points for that. If you can put together a comprehensive timeline and budget for how your project is going to flow, as well as a maintenance plan, a lot of gearheads that I've talked to over the years that have been, working on diesel engines for their whole careers, they know how to do it. They know how to get around to, how to fix a diesel engine, regardless of size. But when you make that leap to, a different fuel type, especially an electric, motor, then it gets a little bit different. It's a different way of thinking. With an electric vehicle, you have significantly fewer moving parts. So you don't have to plan for air filters or spark plugs or DEF fluid or all those things, but you do have to plan for other things. And so putting together a maintenance plan so that we know that you're aware of the difference of what you're about to get into. And then also whether or not you've received previous funding from DEQ's Volkswagen Share. We want to try and spread this around the state as much as possible. We will give funding again to entities that reapply, but we'll give additional consideration to new entities that haven't applied before or have been unsuccessful previously. So when you submit an application, we need you to fill out the DEQ application form, have an authorized signer, whether it's your county commission chair or your city manager or the transportation director or whoever the authorized signer is for stuff like this needs to sign it, as well as getting a letter of commitment that you're going to follow through on this, also a letter of commitment for the match funds. I said earlier that for an electric vehicle, for example, that we would provide 85% of the cost. We need a letter of commitment that you'll provide the 15% match minimum. And then also all these other deliverables that we need so that we can just make sure that the vehicle that we're going to fund to replace actually is the vehicle that you're proposing. The big difference with this funding round is that we're going through a two-phase application process. This actually, we think, will be beneficial. It might require a little bit more work, but it'll allow more communication between me and potential applicants so that you can make sure that you get the right information into your application, that you submit an eligible application, and that we can evaluate the best quality applications that we can. So during the two-phase application process, the draft application phase will close at 2 p.m. on December 5th. And then after that draft application phase is closed, we'll then look at them for eligibility, not for that scoring criteria, but just to make sure they meet the eligibility requirements that we, for example, we've had an entity before submit an application to replace an older gasoline bus. We can't do that with a settlement. We can only do diesel. And so if I had been able to communicate with them prior to their submittal, then we would have been able to identify a diesel bus, hopefully, that would have been eligible. But I couldn't communicate them because of state procurement laws. And so we ended up having to deem that application ineligible, and we didn't fund it. So this way I'll be able to communicate with you as you're drafting your draft application, and we'll review it for the eligibility criteria. We'll provide feedback by January 9th, 2026, so just after the new year. I found that this time of year for the funding opportunity kind of works well because then units of local government can plan for their next budget year, which generally starts on July 1st. But we also need time in order to be able to, evaluate them, and then, having to do over the holidays adds a little extra wrinkle. And so we'll provide feedback on the draft applications by January 9th, and then the final application will be due January 30th. Now you might think that that's a pretty short turnaround, but hopefully if you've been communicating with me during the course of now to December 5th, what you submit on December 5th for your draft application should be pretty well put together. And then with any feedback that we provide by January 9th, you should have all the information that you need in order to submit a pretty solid application for the draft application. It would simply just be a matter, hopefully, of tweaking some of the language in your application, and things of that nature. So hopefully that quick 3-week turnaround shouldn't be too big of a lift for potential applicants. For RFA questions, if you have questions after this webinar, if you're somebody that couldn't attend the webinar live, you can ask questions of me via email or phone before 2 p.m. on December 5th. That's when the draft application deadline is. So really, it's an open line of communication between me and potential applicants between now and the draft application deadline. After that draft application deadline, and after the final application deadline opens on January 16th, after we provide the feedback to you, then questions will only need to be submitted through our online Emacs application portal. The draft applications will be submitted to me directly via email. But then for our formal procurement process to select actual applications for the actual funding, you need to be registered through Emacs, and we'll provide information on our website about how to do that. Usually, Emacs is used by the state to buy a whole ton of toilet paper or stuff like that, buy vehicles for the state's use. Well, now we're trying to do it so that we can select you as a potential applicant to receive funds from us. It's a little bit of square peg and round hole, but it's what's available to us now, and we'll provide more information on our website about it. Feel free if your business or local government hasn't already registered in Emacs, start poking around there and also asking me questions about that. But again, once we get to that formal final application phase, questions will only be answered through Emacs. But again, hopefully you've asked all of your questions between now and December 5th in order to get your questions asked for your potential application. So just a quick recap. We are doing replacement of trucks, diesel trucks and buses and airport ground support equipment. The draft applications are due to me via email by December 5th, 2025. The final applications are due January 30th, 2026. The project period, once you get an award and once you execute a contract with DEQ, which is a whole other process I'm not going to really talk about right now, but once that contract is signed, you have 20 months to get your new vehicle or equipment delivered and to scrap your old vehicle that we're replacing. This is funded by the Volkswagen Emissions Mitigation Trust, and we have approximately $3-ish million available for awards. I'd say that because we're constantly earning interest on it, so we may have a couple, maybe 10 more thousand between now and January. I don't know how much interest we'll earn between now and then, but right now it's about $3 million. If you have questions about it, here's my contact information, and I am open to answering questions about how to apply.
So if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your hand. I can allow you to talk. Otherwise, you can type in the chat, and we can answer your questions that way as well. Brian, I've allowed you. You might have to unmute yourself. Brian Hansel.
Yep, I got it. Thank you. When you say scrap, what do you mean by that?
Sure. So one of the things that the settlement requires, and then we kind of mirrored off an existing EPA program, is whatever vehicle you're looking to replace through this project. This is not for the purchase of new vehicles. If you say, "Hey, my business needs another truck," we can't add to your fleet and just simply purchase a new truck or add a vehicle to your fleet. You have to be replacing an older vehicle. And so, generally speaking, for scrapping, we say that you need to cut the rail chassis in half and also drill a 3-inch hole into the engine block. We're willing to accept other methods like a claw and things of that nature, but the vehicle needs to be rendered and the engine needs to be rendered unusable and inoperational forever. If there are parts that you want to keep, if there's a special steering wheel that is near and dear to your heart, feel free to keep that stuff. But the chassis and the engine need to be rendered unusable.
All right, thank you. That's what I thought.
All right, it looks like Elizabeth, if your school district uses a bus contractor, would the contractor be the one to submit the application?
That's a good question, Elizabeth. Thank you. And I actually misread that incorrectly. And so there's one thing I want to clarify too. It's one application per vehicle or per equipment. So if you want to apply for more than one vehicle or equipment replacement, excuse me, you can, but you need to do one application per vehicle. So keep that in mind. We have awarded entities multiple awards in a funding round. We awarded, well, I mentioned First Student down in Billings, which provides school bus services to Billings School District. We awarded them 8 awards, 8 separate awards for 8 electric school buses 4 years ago. When they applied, it was First Student that directly applied. It could have been Billings School District, I suppose, that could have applied. But because First Student owns and operates their own buses down there in Billings, just like here in Helena and down in Bozeman, they applied themselves directly. And I would think that if in your neck of the woods, Elizabeth, that if your school bus contractor were to apply, since they're the ones that own and operate it, they would probably be the ones applying directly. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
All right. Michael in the Q&A asked, I was trying to look through the category C and trying to see if the state created special education cooperatives vehicles might apply.
Maybe I'd have to dig into that, Michael, because I haven't gotten that question before. So feel free to follow up with me and we can try and figure that out. I'm still a little unfamiliar on what that even is. We don't need to get into education policy right now, but I want to find a way to get to yes. So we'll figure it out. So feel free to follow up with me afterwards, Michael. And then to anonymous attendee, one thing that we're working on right now is we're updating our website, the DEQ's Alternative Fuels and Transportation page, to have the funding opportunity, the application forms. There are separate application forms, one for truck and buses, one for airport equipment, as well as examples of eligible and ineligible projects, and then also what the draft model contract will look like, as well as FAQs, frequently asked questions from previous funding rounds. And we'll try and add these in as well to that FAQ document that we'll be putting up. If it's not up now, it should be up very, very soon.
Any other questions? If anybody wants to raise their hand or for the chat. Oh, there's one more in the chat. Would the purchase of a new school activity bus fit under the grant as long as the scrap model is between 1992 and 2009, or does it have to be a yellow bus?
It would have to be a yellow bus. Well, there's a couple of things that go along with that. First of all, as much as I like to talk about electric vehicles, I own an EV myself, and I'm very excited about the ones that we funded. I will readily admit that electric school buses are not ready for activities. These are not the buses you pile the football team in and go across the state to the state tournament in. They simply don't have that capability yet. You know, the max, if you get the biggest, beefiest battery that you can for an electric school bus, I think their range might be around 300 miles. But then if you go all the way down to 5 or 10% and you charge up again, it'll take you a while to charge back up again. So this isn't really for activity buses. I think some of them have been used for activities. The example that I know of, this isn't really a school activity, but like after Havre got their 2 school buses, the school board always does kind of a lap around the school district at the beginning of the school year to talk about all the needs and issues that they need to tackle for that school year, and also in general, I assume, maintenance of the buildings and things of that nature. And they insisted on using an electric school bus. Now that was just driving around Havre, so that wasn't a big deal. I think also, in Big Fork, they drove their electric school bus up to Kalispell to go bowling, but that's also not a big drive. So if you're driving around states or driving around cities for activities, or even like East Helena, if they were to come over to the capital for a school field trip, that wouldn't be that big of a lift. Or Clinton, if they were to go to Missoula, go to, I don't know, U of M to campus or something like that for a field trip, that wouldn't be that big of a deal either, I don't think. So no, this is the way that we've written it, and you'll see it in the funding opportunity once it's posted, is we do say it has to be a yellow bus. It can't be a white bus. We also will be taking a look at the, when you submit your application, you provide a quote. We ask that you provide at least 3 different quotes. Now I know that for some types of vehicles, there simply aren't 3 quotes to be gotten. When we first did the electric street sweepers 4 years ago, there was literally one company that made them. Now there's more, but at the time you could only get one. And so you just have to submit something along with your application saying, I couldn't get a second or a third quote because of this reason. Either the vendor didn't want to give it to me, couldn't give me one, or they're literally not available. Then simply submit that with your quote. But I think now that the market's matured enough, especially school buses, street sweepers, transit buses, things of that nature, that you can get your 3 quotes. But anyway, when you send us your quote, we'll be looking to see if, do you have a DVD player that you're going to be installing because it's an activity bus, or a bathroom in the back. I don't know. We can't pay for those. We're not going to pay for those. So that would be added on to your cost share, and we would just need to figure it out. So it'd just likely be your basic yellow school bus, seatbelts if you want them. We wouldn't take that out as an amenity. That's more of a safety issue. Of course, the 6-foot stop arm and things of that nature is what we're looking for here.
Do you have an estimate for how much charging infrastructure costs for school buses?
So the school districts, the 6 school districts that operate the school buses currently around Montana, 4 of them do it one way, 2 of them do it a different way. For 4 of them, they use what in the EV world is called level 2 charging. They use a 240 volt hookup, and it will take a fully depleted electric vehicle anywhere between 6 to 8 hours to fully charge. Now, when the school bus is parked at the bus barn overnight, it's not going anywhere on an emergency grocery store run or anything like that. That's more than enough time for it to fully charge back up again and be ready for the morning route. So some school districts do that. The equipment for those level 2 chargers can cost anywhere between several $100, so $700 or $900. They can cost a couple thousand, maybe $5,000-ish, depending on how many bells and whistles it comes with. And then, to get the utility to hook it up may cost another couple $1,000s. 2 of the other school districts use DC fast charging, direct current fast charging, that charges the bus up quicker if you feel like you need the bus to be ready to go a little bit quicker, especially during the middle of the day. Then 2 of the school districts have done that. That equipment costs significantly more. They can cost, well, depending on how fast of the charger you want, they can cost $30,000 to $50,000 each, going over $100,000 probably. And then the associated infrastructure and utility hookup will cost quite a bit more too. Again, this funding opportunity can pay for those, or can pay up to 85% of those costs. So when you see the application, you'll get your quote for the bus. So set aside the charging equipment for a moment. You'll get a quote for the bus, and we will pay, and then you'll put in there what the cost of the bus will be and what 85% what you're requesting would be. And then for the cost of the infrastructure, you would, contact either the bus vendor that's selling you the bus. They can, in all likelihood, sell you the charging equipment as well, or you can go out and get a separate quote. But anyway, you would provide a quote for your charging equipment. And then also between now and December 5th, you're also needing to talk to your electric utility provider, an electrician. Your electrician probably knows how to install a 240 volt outlet. When I got my charger installed in my garage, they installed a NEMA plug, the same plug that my drying machine uses. They simply hung, with screws, the charger on the wall, but that wasn't electrical work. That was simply putting some screws in my drywall. So that's all he really installed was that 240 volt charger. And that's pretty simple. Now, if you start getting to the DC charging, he'll probably also know what information to give you there. But the fast charging does get a little bit more complicated. So if you are thinking about an electric school bus, transit bus, street sweeper, whatever, garbage truck, reach out to an electrician and your utility provider as soon as you possibly can.
For dump trucks and snow plows, what equipment can be covered under the grant? Dump beds, hydraulics, etc.?
Yeah, so one thing that we ask for in this is that you're doing like for like. So this is a crude example that doesn't necessarily get at Donnie's question. But for example, if you say, I got this big old, dump truck that I don't need anymore, so I want to downsize. You know what I do need? I need a passenger car to get me around to all my business meetings. I'm not going to pay for that. DEQ can't pay for that. We can help you downsize. So if you think that you have a delivery truck, if you have a really big delivery truck right now, and you think that a smaller version will get the same work done, we will help you downsize. We will not help you upsize. If you think that you need a bigger truck in order to do more work, we won't help you upsize. We'll help you do like for like, or like to smaller. But if you are doing like for like, if you're replacing a garbage truck that has the ability to pull one of those massive dumpsters that people get put outside their house when they're doing spring cleaning, they just want to be able to throw all the garbage into a massive dumpster out by the curb, and then somebody comes by and picks it up. If there's special equipment that your truck needs in order to be able to pull that thing on and off of its back, then yeah, we'll help pay for that. We're helping pay for some garbage trucks up right now in Missoula and Billings. They're all different configurations, and some of them are actually like garbage trucks that go around and pick up, residential waste, from the garbage can you put out by the curb or whatever. Some of them do slightly different things like pulling those big dumpsters on and off. So we will help pay for the appropriate cost percentage of what it is that you're putting on that chassis.
We have another question in the Q&A. Can we stack with EPA funding? If so, is there an order that DEQ requires the stacking to be implemented?
These funds can be matched with federal funding. We have done that in the past with the Federal Transit Administration's FTA low-no funding for transit buses. So yes, you can do that. When you submit your application, you submit your letter of commitment that you're going to be matching it. You would say then that we've submitted for EPA dollars, or we have been awarded EPA dollars for this type of project. And then whatever documentation you can provide to back that up. Now, if it's something that you've simply submitted and you're waiting on, you would need to say that. And what would happen if you don't get the EPA funding? If you already have the EPA funding awarded and you just need a little bit of extra money, like the DEQ funding, in order to be able to move forward, then submit a copy of your award letter again. In this case, for me, more is better. And so if you can submit that award letter along with your letter of commitment, then do that. The one thing I would make sure that folks know, though, is that this funding cannot pay for anything that's already being done. So if you've already ordered a new electric school bus or a new garbage truck or whatever, and it's on its way, and you want help paying for it, we can't do that. Project activities can only start at the execution of the contract with DEQ. I know that adds quite a bit of runway to doing this type of project, because in reality, those project activities, after we go through the process of evaluating these applications, drawing down the Volkswagen funds from the settlement trustee, which is a 60-day process, in all likelihood, a contract wouldn't be executed between DEQ and you as the applicant until next summer, which is not ideal, I acknowledge, but that's just the way it is, given all the different hoops that we have to jump through as a state agency and also dealing with the settlement trustee. So make sure that this is something that you have not started yet, that you are going to do and are not currently doing.
If anyone else has any additional questions, you can type them into the chat, the Q&A, or raise your hand.
Donnie, can you explain what you mean by cost escalation?
One. Donnie, you should be able to talk now.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just like on like MDT grants and stuff like that, where like if I'm getting quotes this fall for a piece of equipment, those are probably going to be good for 30 or 60 days. By the time the grant is awarded, you'll be in a probably new model year of vehicle and costs may go up. MDT says you can include like 3% cost escalation in your pricing for covering that, or is that just the risk of you get the grant, your prices go up? How does that work on this?
I would suggest by starting by talking to your vendor about this, because I know that this funding is different than other forms of funding provided by either MDT or certain parts of the federal government. Because this is such, as I was just explaining, such a long build up to actually starting a project. A lot of entities aren't used to it. So talking with your vendor saying, I want to buy something from you, or I want to get a quote from you, but this is going to be a while until, we actually pay for it. How long can you give me on how good this quote is going to be? Generally, with the school buses that we have funded, the electric school buses, for example, and also the street sweepers, I suppose, those quotes stayed good for quite a while, and it was a while until they got paid. The other thing that I should probably explain here too, for you, Donnie, and for everybody else, is that this is a reimbursement project. So you go through the process of applying for it. I gave the loose timeline that we'll probably execute a contract, excuse me, in next summer sometime, probably July or August. And then at that point, you can order your vehicle. Not sure how long it'll take to get there, but you have 20 months. So, maybe by the end of 2027, at the latest, you'd be ready to wrap this up. Once you submit all the deliverables about how you scrapped your old vehicle, cut the chassis, got the hole in the engine block, your new vehicle is, ready to go on the road, whatever hoops you have to jump through there with a highway patrol or whoever, then we would release the funding to you. We can't release the funding to you when the vehicle arrives. We have to get all the deliverables, for us so that we know that we're paying for what we said we would pay for. And that's caused a problem in the past. And I know that, that's not the way all vendors have been used to working, but that's the way we have to do it here. So it'll be a while. So hopefully your vendor can be patient and work with you, Donnie. But we have also run into other obstacles. One thing that happened earlier this year is that with all the tariffs that went into effect, there are some things that are literally not available for purchase anymore. The example that I'll give you is a baggage tractor that we funded for an airport. They wanted lead acid batteries operate better in colder climates like Montana than lithium ion do. And you can get lead acid for airport ground support equipment, not for a passenger vehicle. Those are all lithium ion, but that's also more advanced technology than an airport, belt loader or baggage tractor. But anyway, they wanted to go with lead acid batteries for their baggage tractor. It also costs less. But once the tariffs went into effect, there was literally none to be purchased in the entire country. And so they came back to us and said, well, we have to get electric because that's what the settlement requires. There's a lithium ion powered baggage tractor that we could get, but it's more money. We took that under consideration. We ended up awarding them a slightly higher dollar amount so that they could afford that lithium ion battery that they didn't think that they would have to try and purchase at the time. So again, we'll try and be as flexible as we can, try and get to yes. But if there are some things that you realize as you're getting ready to place your purchase order saying, oh, I really wish I had the bigger cup holder. That's a crude example. But if there's a feature that you say, oh, I should have included that in the quote, I'm not quite sure if we're going to be as willing to increase the dollar amount for something like that. But if it's just generally because of inflation or tariffs or global supply chain issues, we'll try and figure out a way to help you guys. It may not necessarily be increasing your dollar amount because really with an 85% cost share on electrics, you're getting into a new vehicle at a fraction of the cost as if you're paying for a new diesel all by yourself with the help of this grant funding. Now, if you're going to an alternative fuel or a new cleaner diesel, I don't know how things are fluctuating in that market, but anyway, we'll try and figure out a way to work with you, Donnie, throughout the process. And again, you and I can be talking between now and December 5th to make sure you get a competitive, strong application put together.
Thanks.
All right, we probably have time for one more question. There's one more question in the Q&A. Can you clarify a private company eligible to replace 1992 to 2009 Class 7 diesel with a new diesel for 20%, 25% for alternative fuel, and 75% for electric? Am I understanding right?
Yeah, correct. So, yeah, so that's this slide here. So if you're a private company, anonymous attendee, we could pay up to a quarter of the cost of a new alternative fuel. So again, CNG, propane, or 20% of the cost of a new cleaner diesel, or 3/4 of the cost of a new all electric. And then with the all electric, that award can also include the associated charging equipment for that electric vehicle, which whatever it is that you're getting. Does that make sense? Right. And again, these slides will be up on our website sometime in the very near future. The request for applications itself walks through all of this. And again, I'll be available for questions via email or phone between now and 2 p.m. on December 5th. So feel free to ping me with questions, but read through all the documents once they get posted and have a chance to sit on them. Think about what kind of vehicles you would want to replace. The other caveat that I should have mentioned earlier is that we want this to be the vehicle that you're replacing needs to be in good repair and in regular use. We don't want to replace the beater that's sitting at the back of your lot that hasn't done anything for 10 or 15 years. We want to replace something that's out there, that's putting those emissions out into our air, and that can stand for replacement and is eligible under the Volkswagen requirements. And again, I can help you answer those questions, but once you have a chance to noodle on the funding opportunity requirements, think about what in your fleet would be up for replacement or would be eligible for replacement, and feel free to be in touch with me and we can put together a strong application. And I'm going to give everybody the same amount of help, the same level of information and detail that any of you, that is anybody else. And also regardless of fuel type that you're applying for, I'll give you as much and all information that you could possibly hope for. Great. And then Maddie dropped into the chat my email information. If you Google Montana DEQ alternative fuels, you should be able to find our web page. You can also navigate through it through all of our menu options, but go to our alternative fuels and transportation page. And Maddie just dropped that in the chat. Thank you. And you can get my contact information there. But happy to answer any questions over the next 2-ish months. And I look forward to seeing some really great applications. So if there, no, that's just thank you. Great. Well, any other questions? Great. Well, thank you everyone who attended. We really appreciate your time and look forward to hearing more from you. Have a great week.